Mother Bear bowed as the baby hit a temperature milestone. What happened next was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The old wooden cabin creaked under the weight of another sleepless night. Rain drummed against the windows while the thunder rolled across the mountains like an angry beast. Inside, Mira clutched her baby daughter close to her chest, feeling the heat radiating from the tiny body like a furnace. The thermometer read 104.2 degrees, and nothing seemed to bring it down. "She's burning up, Kane," Mira whispered, her voice breaking as she rocked baby Luna back and forth. The infant's breathing was shallow, her usually bright eyes now glassy and unfocused. "I've tried everything, the medicine, the cool baths, nothing's working." Kane paced the small living room, running his hands through his hair. The nearest hospital was 3 hours away through winding mountain roads, and with this storm, the journey would be nearly impossible. Their old truck barely handled good weather, let alone this chaos outside. "Maybe we should try calling Doctor Harrison again," Kane suggested, though they both knew the phone lines had been down for hours. The storm had knocked out power to half the mountain, leaving them isolated in their little cabin that suddenly felt more like a prison. Luna let out a weak cry, so different from her usual healthy wails. It was the sound that made Mira's heart crack a little more. She had been a mother for only 8 months, but she knew this wasn't normal. This wasn't just a regular fever that would break by morning. "Listen," Kane said suddenly, stopping his pacing. "Do you hear that?" Mira strained to listen over the storm. There was something else out there, a sound that didn't belong to the wind or rain. It was low, almost like breathing, but deeper, much deeper. "Probably just the storm playing tricks," Mira said, but her voice carried doubt. She had lived in these mountains long enough to know the difference between wind and something else. The sound came again, closer this time. Luna stirred in her arms, and for a moment her breathing seemed to steady. It was such a small change that Mira almost missed it, but there it was, a slight improvement right when that strange sound echoed through the night. Kane moved to the window, pushing aside the heavy curtains. The rain made it hard to see much, but there was definitely something out there. Something large moving between the trees. "Kane, what is it?" Mira asked, instinctively holding Luna tighter. "I'm not sure," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "But whatever it is, it's watching the house." Thunder crashed overhead, and in that brief moment when lightning lit up the forest, they both saw it clearly. A massive brown bear stood at the edge of the clearing, perfectly still despite the storm raging around it. But this wasn't just any bear. This one was different. The bear's head was bowed low, almost touching the ground, in what looked impossibly like a gesture of respect, or reverence. And in Mira's arms, Luna's fever dropped another degree. Kane stepped back from the window, his face pale in the lamplight. "Mira, you need to see this," he said, his voice trembling with something between fear and wonder. Mira stood slowly, careful not to disturb Luna, and moved to the window. The bear was still there, motionless as a statue carved from the darkness itself. But now she could see something else that made her blood run cold. The bear wasn't alone. 2 smaller shapes moved beside the massive creature. Cubs. They were huddled close to their mother, but unlike normal bear cubs that would be seeking shelter from the storm, these 2 seemed to be waiting for something, watching the cabin with an intelligence that made Mira's skin crawl. "This isn't right," Kane whispered. "Bears don't behave like this. They don't just stand in storms, and they certainly don't bow." As if hearing his words, the mother bear lifted her head slightly, those dark eyes seeming to look directly through the window and into Mira's soul. Then, impossibly, the bear took a step forward. Not aggressive, not hunting, but deliberate, purposeful. Luna stirred in Mira's arms, and for the first time in hours she opened her eyes fully. The glassy, unfocused look was gone, replaced by the bright, alert gaze Mira knew so well. The baby's skin was still warm, but the burning heat was fading with each passing moment. "Kane," Mira breathed, "look at her temperature." Kane grabbed the thermometer with shaking hands and took a reading. 103.1, he said in disbelief. "It's dropping fast. How is that possible?" Another step forward from the bear. The cubs followed, their small paws making no sound on the wet ground. They moved like shadows, like spirits of the forest given form, and with each step they took toward the cabin, Luna's condition improved. "This is impossible," Kane said, backing away from the window. "Fevers don't just break like this. Not without medication, not without treatment." But Mira was beginning to understand something that defied everything she thought she knew about the world. She looked down at Luna, who was now reaching toward the window with tiny, grasping fingers, as if she could sense the presence outside. "What if," Mira said slowly, "what if they're here for her?" "What do you mean?" Kane's voice was sharp with worry. "Think about it. The fever spikes just as the storm starts. Then these bears show up, acting nothing like bears should act. And now Luna's getting better just by being near them." Mira's voice grew stronger as the pieces began to fit together in her mind. "What if this isn't a coincidence?" The mother bear took another step forward, and this time she made a sound. Not a growl or a roar, but something softer, almost like a song. The cubs joined in, their smaller voices creating a harmony that seemed to resonate through the cabin walls. Luna began to laugh. Not the weak, sickly sounds she had been making, but genuine baby laughter, bright and joyful. Her fever was now at 102.8 and still dropping. "They're singing to her," Mira whispered in amazement. "The bears are singing to our baby." Kane stared at his wife and daughter, then back at the window where the impossible scene continued to unfold. "Mira, this doesn't make sense. Bears don't sing. They don't heal sick children. They don't—" His words died as the mother bear moved closer still, now just 20 feet from their front door. In the lamplight spilling from the cabin windows, they could see her more clearly. Her fur wasn't just brown. It was marked with strange patterns, silver streaks that seemed to shimmer like moonlight on water. And her eyes, those deep, intelligent eyes, held something that looked remarkably like compassion. "She's beautiful," Mira breathed, no longer afraid. The fear had been replaced by something else, something warm and inexplicable. The bear lowered her head again, that same respectful bow from before, and made another soft sound. This time, Luna responded with a coo of her own, as if she understood perfectly what was being said. Kane moved to the door, his hand hovering over the lock. "Mira, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," Mira said, looking down at her daughter, whose fever was now at 102.2, "that maybe we shouldn't be afraid of whatever's happening here. Maybe we should be grateful." The storm continued to rage overhead, but inside the cabin and in the clearing outside, a strange peace had settled. The bears waited patiently, the baby grew stronger by the minute, and two parents stood on the edge of discovering something that would change everything they believed about the world. But neither Kane nor Mira noticed the fourth shadow moving through the trees behind the bear family. Something larger than the mother bear, something that moved with predatory grace through the storm. Something that had been drawn by the same mysterious force that brought the bears, but for very different reasons. Luna's fever hit 101.9, and the mother bear suddenly lifted her head, her ears pricked forward in alarm. The cubs pressed closer to their mother, their earlier calm replaced by obvious fear. Whatever was coming through the storm, it wasn't here to help. The mother bear's entire body tensed, her muscles coiling like springs ready to release. She let out a low warning growl that rumbled through the night like distant thunder. The cubs immediately scrambled behind her massive form, their earlier playful curiosity replaced by instinctive terror. Cain felt it too, that primal sense of danger that made the hair on his arms stand up. "Something's wrong," he whispered, moving protectively toward Mira and Luna. Through the storm, they could hear it now. Heavy footsteps that shook the ground with each impact. Not the measured, careful steps of the bear family, but something else entirely. Something that crashed through the underbrush without concern for stealth or grace. Luna's fever had dropped to 101.5, but now she began to whimper again, sensing the change in atmosphere. The healing song of the bears had stopped, replaced by tense silence broken only by the approaching threat. "Cain, get the rifle," Mira said quietly, but her husband was already moving toward the gun cabinet. His hands shook as he loaded the weapon, though they both knew that whatever was out there might not be stopped by bullets. The mother bear took several steps back toward the cabin, positioning herself between her cubs and the approaching danger. But instead of retreating further, she did something that made both Cain and Mira gasp in shock. She looked directly at their window and nodded. It was unmistakable. A clear, deliberate nod of communication, as if she was saying, "I understand. I'll protect them too." "Did you see that?" Cain breathed, lowering the rifle slightly. Before Mira could answer, the thing in the forest revealed itself. It emerged from between the trees like a nightmare-given form. A bear, yes, but unlike any bear they had ever seen or imagined. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, even on all fours. Its black fur seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and its eyes glowed with an unnatural red fire that cut through the darkness. But the most terrifying thing about this creature wasn't its size or its glowing eyes. It was the wrongness of it. The way it moved with jerky, unnatural motions, like something that wasn't quite comfortable in its own skin. The way its breath came out in visible puffs that looked more like smoke than steam. "What is that thing?" Mira whispered, clutching Luna closer to her chest. The massive black bear let out a roar that was nothing like the earlier gentle sounds from the mother bear. This was the sound of rage incarnate, of something that existed only to destroy. The windows of the cabin rattled in their frames, and even the storm seemed to pause in respect for this terrible sound. Luna's fever spiked back up to 102.3 in an instant. The mother bear responded with her own roar, but hers carried something different. Where the black beast's call was pure malice, hers was fierce protection. She reared up on her hind legs, making herself as large as possible, silver markings on her fur beginning to glow with their own soft light. "The markings," Cain said in amazement. "They're glowing." The silver streaks across the mother bear's coat were indeed luminescent now, creating patterns that seemed almost like writing, like ancient symbols that pulsed in rhythm with Luna's heartbeat. As the glow intensified, the baby's fever began to drop again, fighting against whatever malevolent influence the black bear brought with it. The two cubs had pressed themselves against the cabin's front porch, seeking shelter. But they weren't just hiding. They were positioning themselves strategically, one on each side of the door, as if they understood that the battle about to unfold would determine whether the family inside lived or died. The black bear charged forward with impossible speed, its massive form moving like liquid shadow across the clearing. But the mother bear was ready. She met the attack head-on, and when their bodies collided, the sound was like thunder and lightning striking the same spot. They rolled across the muddy ground, claws and teeth flashing in the storm. But this wasn't just a physical fight. Each time the bears made contact, there were flashes of light. Silver from the mother, sickly red from the attacker. Energy crackled between them like competing storms. "This isn't natural," Cain said, his voice filled with awe and terror. "None of this is natural." Through the chaos of the battle, something even stranger began to happen. Other sounds emerged from the forest. Howls and calls that didn't belong to any animal Cain or Mira could identify. More creatures were coming, drawn by the conflict. "Are those wolves?" Mira asked, but even as she said it, she knew they weren't. The sounds were too varied, too intelligent, too organized. The first to emerge from the tree line wasn't a wolf at all, but a massive elk with antlers that seemed to be made of crystallized moonlight. It moved with the same purposeful grace as the mother bear, and its eyes held that same impossible intelligence. Behind it came others, a family of raccoons whose fur sparkled with the same silver markings as the bear, an owl whose feathers shifted colors in the lamplight, a fox whose tail left trails of soft light as it moved. All of them positioned themselves around the clearing, forming a protective circle around the cabin. All of them watching the battle between the two bears with intense focus. "It's like they're choosing sides," Cain whispered. The black bear threw the mother bear off with tremendous force, sending her tumbling toward the cabin. She hit the ground hard, but rolled gracefully back to her feet, never taking her eyes off her opponent. Silver light pulsed brighter along her markings, and she made that soft singing sound again. This time, all the other animals joined in. The elk's call was deep and resonant. The owl's voice was a haunting melody. The raccoons chittered in harmony, while the fox added a higher note that wove through the others like silver thread through fabric. Together, they created a symphony that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. Luna's fever plummeted to 100.8, then 100.2, then 99.9. Normal temperature. But more than that, she began to glow with the same soft silver light as the animals outside. "Cain," Mira gasped, looking down at her daughter. "Look at her hands." Luna's tiny palms were pressed against the window, and where they touched the glass, intricate patterns of silver light spread outward like frost on a winter morning. The patterns were identical to the markings on the mother bear's fur. The black bear let out another roar of rage, but this time there was something else in the sound. Fear. It was losing, and it knew it. But instead of retreating, it did something that chilled both parents to the bone. It began to change. Its form rippled like water, growing larger and more distorted. Its legs lengthened, its torso stretched, and its face began to take on features that were almost human. Almost, but horribly wrong. "What is that thing?" Mira cried, backing away from the window. The creature that had been a bear was now something else entirely. Something that walked upright on legs too long for its body, with arms that dragged along the ground and a face that was a nightmare fusion of human and animal features. And it was looking directly at Luna with those burning red eyes, its mouth opening to reveal rows of teeth that belonged to no earthly creature. The protective circle of animals tightened around the cabin, but Cain could see the fear in their eyes now. Whatever this thing was, it was beyond even their ancient power to stop. That's when Luna did something that changed everything. She laughed, not the weak cry of a sick baby, but the pure, joyful laughter of a healthy child. And with that laugh, a wave of silver light exploded outward from the cabin, washing over every creature in the clearing. The twisted thing that had been the black bear screamed as the light touched it. its form beginning to dissolve like smoke in the wind. But before it disappeared entirely, it spoke. Its voice was like grinding stone and broken glass, forming words that no human throat should have been able to produce. The awakening has begun. They will come for her. Then it was gone, leaving only the echo of its terrible promise hanging in the storm-filled air. The other animals began to fade too, not destroyed like the dark creature, but simply melting back into the forest like morning mist. The elk dipped its magnificent head toward the cabin in what looked like a bow of respect. The owl spread its wings wide in a gesture that seemed like a blessing. One by one, they disappeared into the night. Only the mother bear and her cubs remained. She approached the cabin once more, her silver markings now dim but still visible. When she reached the window where Luna's handprints still glowed on the glass, she placed one massive paw against the other side. For a moment, bear and baby were connected through the thin barrier of glass, silver light flowing between them like a shared heartbeat. Then the mother bear stepped back, gathered her cubs with a gentle nudge, and looked one last time at the family inside. Her eyes seemed to say, "This is only the beginning." As the bear family disappeared into the storm, Luna's fever broke completely. Her handprints faded from the window, but the memory of what they had witnessed would stay with Cain and Mira forever. Because deep down, they both knew the creature had been telling the truth. The awakening had begun, and they would come for her. But what exactly was Luna awakening to? And who were they that would come seeking her? The storm began to subside as the first hints of dawn crept over the mountains, but inside the cabin, Cain and Mira sat in stunned silence. Luna slept peacefully in her crib for the first time in days, her breathing steady and her temperature completely normal. Yet neither parent could shake the feeling that their lives had just changed forever. "We need to talk about what we saw," Cain said finally, his voice hoarse from the night's events. He set the rifle aside, though his hands still trembled slightly. Mira nodded, unable to take her eyes off their sleeping daughter. That thing, whatever it was, it knew her. It came here specifically for Luna. "And those other animals," Cain continued, running his hands over his face. "The way they protected us, the way they seemed to understand what was happening, it's like they've been waiting for this moment." As if responding to her parents' conversation, Luna stirred in her sleep. But instead of the normal baby movements they were used to, something extraordinary happened. Tiny sparks of silver light danced across her skin like fireflies, concentrating around her small hands before fading away. "Cain, are you seeing this?" Mira whispered. Before he could answer, a soft knock came at the door. Both parents froze. It was barely dawn. They lived miles from the nearest neighbor, and after what they had just witnessed, a normal visitor seemed impossible. The knock came again, gentle but insistent. Cain grabbed the rifle and moved toward the door, while Mira positioned herself protectively near Luna's crib. "Who's there?" Cain called out, his voice stronger than he felt. "Friends," came a woman's voice from outside. It was calm, melodic, with an accent Cain couldn't quite place. "We mean no harm. We're here because of what happened tonight." Cain and Mira exchanged glances. How could anyone know what had happened? They were completely isolated, and the storm had knocked out all communications. "We know you have questions," the voice continued. "We have answers, but time is running short. The Dark Ones will return, and next time they'll bring more than just one shadow bear." That decided it. Cain slowly unlocked the door and opened it just a crack, keeping the rifle ready. Standing on their porch were three people unlike anyone he had ever seen. The woman who had spoken appeared to be in her 30s, with long silver hair that seemed to move with its own wind, and eyes that shifted between green and gold, like sunlight through leaves. Beside her stood an elderly man with skin like weathered bark, and a young girl who couldn't have been more than 16, both with the same unusual eye coloration. But what made Kane's breath catch was what he saw when the morning light hit them properly. All three had faint silver markings on their skin, similar patterns to what they had seen on the mother bear. "You're like them," Mira said from behind Kane, her voice filled with wonder and fear. "You're like the animals." The silver-haired woman smiled, and when she did, Kane noticed that her teeth were slightly pointed, like a predator's. "Not like them," she corrected gently. "We are them. Or rather, we can be them when the need arises." "Shapeshifters," the elderly man added, his voice carrying the deep resonance they had heard in the elk's call. "Guardians of the old ways, protectors of those who carry the gift." "What gift?" Kane demanded, though part of him already knew the answer. The young girl stepped forward, and Kane could see now that her movements had the same fluid grace as the fox they had seen in the forest. "Your daughter carries the blood of the awakened," she said, her voice bell-clear despite her youth. "She is one of us, born to a human family but carrying the ancient power in her veins." Mira clutched the crib rail so tightly her knuckles turned white. "That's impossible. We're just normal people. We don't have any special powers or magical bloodlines or whatever you're talking about." "The bloodline skips generations," the woman explained, stepping closer to the door. "Sometimes many generations. It can lie dormant for centuries before manifesting again. But when it does awaken, as it has in your daughter, it draws both protectors and predators." "The shadow creatures," Kane said, understanding beginning to dawn. "They can sense her somehow. They feed on awakened energy," the elderly man confirmed grimly. "A newborn awakened is particularly vulnerable. Her power is raw, uncontrolled. It calls to them like a beacon in the darkness." Luna began to stir in her crib, making soft cooing sounds. As she did, the silver markings on all three visitors' skin began to glow faintly, as if responding to her presence. "She's stronger than most," the young girl observed, tilting her head as she listened to sounds only she could hear. "Even untrained, she managed to destroy a shadow bear. That level of power in one so young is remarkable. It's also dangerous," the woman added. "For her and for everyone around her. The shadow creatures will not give up. They'll send more, and stronger ones. Eventually, they'll send the Shadow King himself." "Shadow King?" Mira's voice cracked with fear. "The ancient enemy of our kind," the elderly man explained. "He seeks to corrupt or destroy all who carry the light. He's been hunting the awakened for millennia, growing stronger with each one he claims." Kane felt the weight of their words settling over him like a heavy blanket. "So, what are you saying? That our daughter is in constant danger? That we can never have a normal life?" "We're saying she needs training," the woman replied. "She needs to learn to control her abilities before they control her, and she needs protection while she learns." "What kind of training?" Mira asked, though her protective instincts were already rebelling against the idea of strangers taking her baby anywhere. The young girl smiled, and for a moment her features flickered, showing the brief outline of a fox's face beneath the human mask. "We have a sanctuary, high in the mountains where the old magic is strongest. Children like Luna learn alongside others of their kind, protected by guardians who have kept the shadow at bay for thousands of years." "You want us to give up our daughter," Kane said flatly. "We want you to save her," the elderly man corrected, "and yourselves. The shadow creatures know where she is now. They'll keep coming, growing bolder and more numerous. This cabin, this life you've built, none of it will be safe anymore." As if to emphasize his point, Luna suddenly cried out in her sleep, but this wasn't a normal baby cry. Light erupted from her small form, silver energy that filled the entire cabin with blinding radiance. Every piece of glass in the house, windows, mirrors, drinking glasses, began to resonate with a high, singing note. The three visitors immediately stepped inside, their own markings flaring to life as they formed a protective triangle around the crib. The woman began to hum, the same melody the mother bear had used, and gradually Luna's power subsided. "She's having power dreams," the young girl explained as the light faded. "Visions of what's coming. The awakening process isn't just about developing abilities. It's about seeing the threads of fate that connect all things." Mira leaned over the crib, and her heart nearly stopped. Luna's eyes were open, but they weren't the normal blue of a human baby. They were silver, swirling with depths that seemed impossibly ancient for such a young child. "She's seeing something," Mira whispered. Luna's tiny hand reached up, and when Mira instinctively offered her finger, the baby grasped it with surprising strength. Suddenly, images flooded Mira's mind. She saw vast forests where trees grew in impossible spirals, their leaves shimmering with inner light. She saw cities built from living crystal, where people with silver markings moved between human and animal forms as easily as changing clothes. She saw great battles between creatures of light and shadow, fought across landscapes that existed in the spaces between dreams and reality. And she saw Luna, grown to adulthood, standing at the center of it all. Her daughter was magnificent and terrible, wielding power that could reshape the very fabric of existence. But she was also alone, bearing the weight of choices that would determine the fate of both human and awakened worlds. The vision ended abruptly, leaving Mira gasping and disoriented. "What did you see?" the silver-haired woman asked gently. "Her future," Mira managed to say. "She's going to be powerful, more powerful than any of you, but she's going to have to make terrible choices. All power comes with a price," the elderly man said sadly. "The greater the gift, the heavier the burden. That's why she needs to be prepared. That's why she needs to understand what she is before the weight of destiny falls fully upon her shoulders." Cain looked back and forth between his wife, his daughter, and these strange visitors who claimed to hold the answers to questions he had never known to ask. "If we agree to this, if we let you take her to this sanctuary, will we ever see her again?" "You'll see her," the young girl promised. "But you won't be able to stay with her. Humans can't survive long in the deep sanctuary. The magic there is too intense, too concentrated. It would drive you mad or kill you within days. So, we have to choose between keeping our daughter safe and keeping her with us," Mira said, tears streaming down her face. "There is another option," the woman said carefully. "One that's dangerous for all involved." "What option?" Cain demanded. "You could come with us, but only part way. There's a village at the foot of the sacred mountain where human families of the awakened live. You'd be under our protection, but you'd still be able to see Luna regularly as she grows and trains. It's not ideal, but it would keep your family together." "What's the catch?" Cain asked, because there was always a catch. "The village is a target," the elderly man admitted. "The Shadow King knows about it. He's been planning an assault for decades, waiting for the right moment to strike. If you choose to stay there, you'll be putting yourselves directly in the path of the coming war." "War?" Mira's voice was barely a whisper. "The final conflict between light and shadow," the woman explained. "Your daughter's awakening is a sign that the time is near. The Shadow King grows desperate. He knows that if Luna reaches her full potential, she could be the one to finally destroy him. So he'll throw everything he has at stopping her. Luna began to glow again, but this time the light was different. Instead of the wild, uncontrolled energy from before, it pulsed steadily like a heartbeat, like a countdown. She's aging faster than normal, the young girl observed with alarm. The power is accelerating her development. Even as she spoke, they could all see it. Luna's features were subtly changing, becoming more defined. Her hair was growing longer and darker. Most disturbing of all, her eyes held an awareness that no infant should possess. "How long do we have?" Kane asked. "Hours, maybe less," the woman replied. "The awakening process has begun in earnest. We need to get her to the sanctuary immediately, or the power will burn her out from the inside." "And if we refuse?" Mira asked, though she already knew she couldn't let her daughter die. "Then you'll lose her anyway," the elderly man said gently. "And probably yourselves as well. The shadow creatures are drawn to uncontrolled awakened energy like moths to flame. They're probably already on their way." As if summoned by his words, a howl echoed across the mountains. But this wasn't the call of any earthly wolf. It was the sound of something hungry, something that had caught the scent of its prey. More howls joined the first, coming from different directions. They were being surrounded. "Too late," the young girl whispered, her form beginning to shift and blur as she prepared to take her animal shape. "They're here." The howls grew closer, and with them came other sounds that made Kane's blood freeze. The scraping of claws against stone, the whisper of wings through the air, and underneath it all, a low chanting in a language that hurt to hear. "How many?" the silver-haired woman asked, her own form beginning to ripple as silver fur sprouted along her arms. The young girl closed her eyes, her fox-like ears emerging as she listened to sounds beyond human perception. "Too many. At least a dozen shadow wolves, 3 shadow ravens, and something else. Something big moving through the valley." "A shadow drake," the elderly man said grimly, his human facade melting away to reveal bark-like skin and eyes that glowed with the ancient wisdom of old-growth forests. "They've sent a hunting pack." Luna's glowing intensified, and she began to make sounds that were definitely not normal baby noises. They were complex, musical phrases that seemed to resonate with the very air around them. Each note she uttered made the windows vibrate and sent ripples of silver light across the cabin walls. "She's trying to communicate," Mira realized with shock. "She's trying to tell us something." The woman, now more wolf than human but still able to speak, nodded urgently. Young awakened sometimes skip years of development in moments of crisis. She may have the mental capacity of a much older child right now. Kane stared at his daughter, who was indeed looking at him with eyes that held far too much understanding. "Luna? Can you understand us?" The baby's response was a complex melody that somehow conveyed affirmation, urgency, and something else, a warning. "What is she saying?" Mira asked desperately. The fox girl, now fully transformed but somehow retaining human speech, tilted her head. "She says the shadow creatures aren't just hunting her. They're hunting someone else too, someone who's been hidden here in these mountains for a very long time." "Hidden?" Kane demanded. "Hidden where? We know these mountains. We've lived here for years." "Not in your realm," the tree man explained, his voice now carrying the deep groaning of ancient wood. "In the spaces between, the shadow lands that exist parallel to your world." A tremendous crash echoed from the forest, followed by the sound of massive trees being uprooted and thrown aside. Whatever was coming toward them was enormous and getting closer fast. "The shadow drake," the wolf woman confirmed. "We need to move now." But before anyone could take a step, the cabin door exploded inward. What came through wasn't one of the shadow creatures they were expecting. It was a man, tall and lean, with wild gray hair and clothes that looked like they hadn't been changed in decades. His eyes were the same silver as Luna's, but they held a desperate, haunted quality that spoke of years of running and hiding. "Grandfather?" the fox girl gasped, her form flickering back toward human in surprise. "No time for reunions, Kira," the man said urgently. "They've found the crossing point. The Shadow Drake is using Luna's energy signature to tear through the barriers between worlds." "Crossing point?" Kane demanded, but his question was answered by what happened next. The air in the middle of the cabin began to shimmer and warp, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. Through the distortion, they could see another landscape entirely. A twisted version of their mountain valley where the trees were black and leafless. The sky was the color of dried blood, and creatures of living shadow moved with predatory purpose. "The Shadowlands," Mira whispered in horror. "They're bleeding through," the silver-haired man confirmed. "The Drake is forcing a permanent rift. Once it's fully open, shadow creatures will be able to pour into this world by the thousands." Luna's crying reached a new pitch, but it wasn't the sound of a frightened baby anymore. It was the voice of power itself, demanding attention. Silver light exploded from her small form, and suddenly everyone in the cabin could understand exactly what she was trying to tell them. She wasn't just an awakened child, she was the key. The prophecy that had been spoken of in whispers for generations was finally coming to pass. A child would be born who could either seal the Shadowlands forever or open them completely, allowing light and darkness to merge into something entirely new. And that choice would be hers to make. "The Convergence child," the grandfather breathed. "After all these years, she's finally been born." "What does that mean?" Mira demanded, moving protectively toward Luna's crib, even as reality continued to warp around them. "It means," the wolf woman said, her form shifting back to human as she faced this new revelation, "that everything we thought we knew is wrong. Luna isn't just powerful, she's the linchpin that holds the balance between all worlds." Through the growing rift, they could see the Shadow Drake approaching. It was massive beyond imagination, a creature of pure darkness and malevolence that seemed to absorb light from everything around it. Its eyes burned with the same red fire they had seen in the Shadow Bear, but magnified 100-fold, and riding on its back was a figure that made even the ancient guardians step back in fear. "The Shadow King," the tree man whispered. The figure was humanoid but wrong in every possible way. Too tall, too thin, with joints that bent at impossible angles. Its face was hidden beneath a hood that seemed to be made of living darkness, but they could feel its attention focused on Luna with laser intensity. When it spoke, its voice came from everywhere at once, echoing through both the cabin and the Shadowlands beyond the rift. "Give me the child, and I will make her death quick. Refuse, and I will drag this entire world into shadow, piece by piece, until nothing remains but endless night." Luna's response was immediate and defiant. Light erupted from her, not the gentle silver glow they had seen before, but brilliant white radiance that forced everyone to shield their eyes. When the light faded, she was no longer a baby. She still lay in the crib, but she had aged to approximately 5 years old, her features sharp and intelligent, her silver eyes burning with power that seemed to come from the very heart of creation. "I choose neither," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the air itself sing. "I choose a third path." "Luna," Mira cried, reaching toward her transformed daughter, but Luna held up a small hand, and Mira found herself gently held back by an invisible force. I'm still your daughter, Mama, but I'm also something more now, something I was always meant to be." She stood up in the crib, her movements graceful beyond her apparent age, and faced the Shadow King through the dimensional rift. "You want to merge the worlds, Uncle, but you want to do it through conquest and corruption." "Uncle?" Cain repeated faintly. "The Shadow King was once like us," Luna explained, never taking her eyes off the dark figure. "Long ago he was an awakened child who made the wrong choice. He chose power over love, darkness over light. But he's still family, in a way." The Shadow King's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. "Family? You know nothing, little star child. I chose freedom. Freedom from the endless cycle of birth and death, love and loss. I chose eternity." "You chose emptiness," Luna countered. "And now you want to make everyone else as empty as you are." Around them, the battle was about to begin. The shadow creatures were pouring through the rift in increasing numbers, while the Guardians prepared to make their last stand. But all eyes were on the confrontation between the ancient evil and the impossibly young girl who held the fate of all worlds in her small hands. "What's your third path, child?" the Shadow King asked mockingly. "What grand solution do you propose?" Luna smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the baby she had been just minutes before. "I'm going to fix you." "Fix me?" The Shadow King's amusement was evident even through his otherworldly voice. "The corruption that turned you into what you are, it's like a disease. It spreads and grows, but it's not really you. Underneath all that darkness, you're still the scared little boy who just wanted the pain to stop. I am beyond your comprehension, little one. I am shadow made manifest, the void between stars given form." "You're my great-great-uncle Marcus," Luna said matter-of-factly. "You were 7 years old when the darkness took you. Your favorite color was blue. You loved strawberry jam, and you cried when your pet rabbit died." The Shadow King recoiled as if struck. Around him, the shadow creatures began to waver, their forms becoming less solid. "How do you know that name?" he demanded. "Because I can see everything you've forgotten," Luna said gently. "All the love you buried, all the light you tried to extinguish. It's still there, Uncle Marcus. Hidden under centuries of pain and anger, but still there." She stepped out of the crib, her bare feet touching the cabin floor, and began to walk toward the rift. With each step, her glow intensified, but it wasn't the harsh white light from before. This was warm, golden, like sunlight after a long winter. "Luna, no!" Mira screamed, but the fox girl Kira held her back. "She knows what she's doing," Kira said softly. "This is why she was born. This is her purpose." "To sacrifice herself?" Cain demanded angrily. "To heal what was broken," the grandfather corrected. "To find the solution that no one else could see." Luna reached the edge of the rift and extended her hand toward the Shadow King. "You don't have to be alone anymore, Uncle Marcus. You don't have to carry all that pain by yourself." "It's too late for me, child. I've done terrible things. I've destroyed entire worlds. Because you were hurt and scared, and no one showed you another way. But it's not too late. It's never too late to choose love over fear." The Shadow King stared at the small hand extended toward him, and for the first time in centuries he hesitated. "If I accept your offer, if I allow myself to be healed, what happens to my power? What happens to all the shadow creatures that depend on me?" "They become something new," Luna said. "Just like you will. The power doesn't disappear, it transforms. Instead of destroying, it creates. Instead of consuming, it nurtures. And if I refuse?" Luna's expression grew sad. "Then I'll have to stop you the other way. and that would mean destroying everything you've built, including the parts of you that are still good. The Shadow King looked at his shadow army, then at the guardians prepared to fight to the death, then finally at the small girl who offered him redemption after centuries of damnation. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why show mercy to one who has shown none?" "Because that's what family does," Luna said simply. "We forgive each other even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of a decision that would reshape the fundamental nature of reality itself. And in that silence, something extraordinary began to happen. The shadow creatures stopped advancing. One by one, they began to approach Luna, drawn not by hunger or malice, but by something they had never felt before. Hope. The first to reach her was a shadow wolf, its red eyes dim with confusion. Luna reached out and touched its head gently, and the creature's form began to change. The darkness fell away like shedding skin, revealing a magnificent wolf with fur like starlight. "You're giving them back their true forms," the wolf woman breathed in amazement. More shadow creatures approached, and each one Luna touched was transformed. Shadow ravens became birds with feathers that shimmered like galaxies. Shadow bears became creatures of living moonlight. Even the massive drake began to change, its malevolent darkness giving way to scales that reflected every color of the rainbow. "The choice is yours, Uncle Marcus," Luna said, her hand still extended toward the Shadow King. "But choose quickly. The transformation requires willing participation. If you wait too long, the momentum will be lost, and we'll have to start over." The Shadow King looked at his army being transformed from instruments of destruction into beings of beauty and wonder. He looked at the guardians who had spent their lives fighting against him. He looked at the family who had been willing to sacrifice everything to protect one small child. And then he looked at Luna, who stood in the space between worlds, offering him a chance at redemption he had never dared dream possible. "I choose," he said finally, reaching out to take her hand. "I choose to remember who I used to be." The moment their hands touched, the entire cabin filled with light so brilliant it seemed to erase the boundaries between worlds entirely. And in that light, everyone present could see the true scope of what Luna was accomplishing. She wasn't just healing one corrupted soul. She was rewriting the very laws that governed the relationship between light and shadow, creating a new reality where both could exist in harmony rather than eternal conflict. But the effort was taking its toll. Even as her power reshaped the universe around them, Luna's young body began to falter under the strain. "She's burning herself out," Mira cried, struggling against the invisible force that held her back. "The convergence is too much for one person to handle," the grandfather said urgently. "She needs help. She needs others to share the burden." Without hesitation, the three guardians stepped forward, joining hands in a circle around Luna. Their own power flowed into her, silver light intertwining with her golden radiance. But it still wasn't enough. "More!" Luna gasped, her form beginning to flicker like a candle in the wind. "I need more help." That's when Cain and Mira realized what they had to do. They might not be awakened themselves, but Luna was their daughter. She carried their love, their hopes, their dreams for her future. And love, they were beginning to understand, was a power that transcended all others. Hand in hand, they walked into the circle of light, adding their human strength to the mystical forces at work. The moment they touched Luna, she stabilized, her power flowing stronger and more controlled than ever before. "Together," she said, smiling at her parents through tears of joy and exhaustion. "We finish this together." The light expanded outward, washing over both worlds and all the spaces in between. And when it finally faded, everything had changed. The rift between dimensions remained open, but it was no longer a wound in reality. It had become a bridge, allowing free travel between worlds that had been separated for far too long. The shadow creatures had been transformed into guardians of this new balance, protectors of the peace Luna had created. And the Shadow King, he was gone. In his place stood a young man who looked remarkably like Cain, but with silver hair and eyes that held both ancient wisdom and newfound hope. "Hello, Marcus," the grandfather said softly. "Welcome home." But even as they celebrated this impossible victory, Luna swayed on her feet. The effort of remaking reality had aged her again. She now appeared to be about 12 years old, but her face was pale with exhaustion. "The work isn't finished," she said quietly. "This is just the beginning. There are other shadow realms, other corrupted souls who need healing, and there will be those who resist the change, who want things to go back to the way they were. But you don't have to do it alone," Mira said, kneeling beside her transformed daughter. "You have family now. All of us." Luna looked around at the guardians, at her parents, at the uncle she had just saved from an eternity of darkness, and smiled. "Yes," she said, "I do have family." As dawn fully broke over the mountains, they could see the full scope of what had changed. In the distance, where there had once been only wilderness, a city of light was taking shape. A place where humans and awakened could live together, where the transformed shadow creatures could find new purpose, and where Luna could grow up surrounded by those who understood her true nature. But first, there was something else that needed to be addressed. "Luna," Cain said carefully, "are you still our little girl?" Luna thought about this seriously, then nodded. "I'm still your daughter, Daddy. I'm just more than I was before. But I'll always be your little girl, no matter how old I get or how powerful I become." She paused, then added with a mischievous grin that was pure child, "Though I might need bigger cribs from now on." As laughter filled the cabin for the first time in what felt like years, none of them noticed the small shadow that detached itself from the wall and slipped out through the broken door. Not all of the Shadow King's influence had been cleansed. A tiny piece of his old darkness had escaped the transformation, hiding itself away until it could find a new host. And it was patient. It could wait decades, centuries if necessary. After all, power like Luna's always came with a price, and that price hadn't been paid yet. But as the small shadow slipped away into the morning light, something else stirred in the forest. The mother bear, who had started it all, emerged from the tree line, her silver markings now permanent and glowing softly in the dawn. She had been watching, waiting, protecting from a distance. She approached the cabin slowly, her two cubs trailing behind her. But they weren't the same cubs from the night before. They had grown too, transformed by the wave of change that Luna had unleashed. Their fur shimmered with constellations of light, and their eyes held the same ancient wisdom as their mother. Luna noticed them first, stepping out of the cabin to meet her original protector. "Thank you," she said simply, placing her small hand on the bear's massive head, "for watching over me when I was too little to watch over myself." The mother bear rumbled softly, a sound of contentment and pride. Then she did something that made everyone watching hold their breath. She shifted. Her form flowed like water, reshaping itself until a woman stood before them. She was tall and strong, with dark hair streaked with silver and kind eyes that held depths of forest wisdom. Her cubs transformed as well, into two young children with the same silver-streaked hair and knowing eyes. "I am Althea," the woman said, her voice carrying the warmth of summer meadows. "Guardian of the first grove, keeper of the ancient compact, and you, little star child, have exceeded every prophecy ever spoken about you." Luna tilted her head, studying the woman who had been her protector. "You've been watching my family for a long time, haven't you?" Althea nodded. "Your bloodline has been under my protection for 7 generations. I watched over your great-grandmother when she chose to hide her abilities and live as a human. I protected your grandmother when she never awakened at all, and I have been waiting your entire short life for this moment." "What moment?" Mira asked, still adjusting to the reality of talking bears and dimensional rifts in her living room. "The moment when the choice was made," Althea replied. "Not just Luna's choice to heal rather than destroy, but all of your choices. Kane's choice to trust instead of fear. Mira's choice to love instead of protect. The Guardian's choice to risk everything for a child they barely knew." She gestured toward the growing city of light in the distance. "That place exists because all of you chose hope over despair, unity over separation. It is a living testament to what can be accomplished when different worlds work together." Marcus, the former Shadow King, stepped forward. He looked younger now, the weight of centuries lifted from his shoulders, but his eyes still held the memory of what he had been. "What about those who won't accept this change? There will be resistance, both from humans who fear the awakened and from shadow creatures who preferred the old ways." "Then we'll face that together too," Luna said, with the confidence of someone far older than her apparent 12 years. "But first, I think we all need some rest. Remaking reality is exhausting work." Kane laughed despite everything they had been through. "I can't believe I'm saying this, but our daughter just saved the universe and she's worried about being tired." "Some things never change," Mira added, pulling Luna into a fierce hug. "Magical powers or not, you're still my baby girl who needs her sleep." Luna hugged her mother back just as fiercely. "Can we stay here tonight?" "In our cabin? Before we have to figure out what comes next?" "Of course we can," Kane said, ruffling his daughter's hair. "This will always be your home, no matter how big you get or how many worlds you save." As the sun climbed higher over the mountains, the group began to settle in for a much-needed rest. The Guardians made themselves comfortable around the cabin, keeping watch but no longer tense with the expectation of battle. Marcus sat by the fireplace, staring into the flames as if seeing his lost childhood reflected there. Althea and her children curled up near the door, ready to shift back to bare form if protection was needed. And in the center of it all, Luna lay down in her parents' bed, suddenly looking very much like the child she was despite everything she had accomplished. "Mama," she said sleepily as Mira tucked her in. "Yes, sweetheart? Do you think the other mothers will understand? The ones in the City of Light who have awakened children too?" Mira's heart swelled with love and pride. Even after reshaping reality, her daughter was thinking about other families, other mothers who might be facing the same fears and wonders they had experienced. "I think they'll understand perfectly," Mira said, kissing Luna's forehead. "And I think you'll help them understand that being different doesn't mean being alone." Luna smiled and closed her silver eyes. Within moments, she was asleep, her breathing deep and peaceful. But just before she drifted off completely, she whispered something that only her parents could hear. "The shadow that got away. It's not going to hurt anyone. I made sure of that." Kane and Mira exchanged glances. "What do you mean?" Kane asked softly. "I gave it a choice too," Luna murmured. "It chose to become something new, something that will help instead of hurt. You'll see." As if summoned by her words, a small movement caught their attention at the window. A tiny creature sat on the sill, no bigger than a hummingbird, but clearly made of the same shadow stuff as the creatures they had fought. except this one sparkled with silver light, and its eyes held curiosity instead of malice. It chirped softly, a sound like silver bells, and Luna smiled in her sleep. "A shadow familiar," Althea said quietly from her place by the door. "They're legendary among our kind. A piece of defeated darkness that chooses to serve the light instead. They're said to be the most loyal guardians in all the realms." The tiny creature settled on Luna's pillow, clearly claiming its place as her personal protector. Kane shook his head in amazement. "Is there anything our daughter can't do?" "Yes," Mira said with absolute certainty. "She can't stop being loved. No matter how powerful she becomes, no matter how many worlds she saves, she's still our little girl, and she always will be." Outside, the mother bear, who had started it all by bowing to a feverish baby, settled down in the clearing with her cubs. The storm had passed, the dangers had been faced, and the impossible had become reality. The city of light continued to grow in the distance, a beacon of hope for all those who had been waiting for a sign that the old conflicts could finally end. And in a small cabin on a mountain, a family slept peacefully, surrounded by guardians both ancient and newly transformed, secure in the knowledge that love had triumphed over fear, hope over despair, and healing over destruction. The fever that had nearly taken Luna's life had instead been the beginning of her true awakening. The bear that had bowed in the storm had been honoring not just a sick child, but the future savior of all worlds. And sometimes, in the quiet moments before dawn, visitors to the mountain swear they can still hear the soft singing of bears in the forest, welcoming new awakened children with the same gentle melody that had once helped heal a baby's fever and change the fate of existence itself. Some miracles, after all, are worth singing about forever. The end.